Here's a harsh truth most people don't want to hear. Stubborn belly fat is not always a willpower problem. Sometimes it's a biological stress signal your body refuses to let go of. You eat better, you try to stay consistent, maybe you even lose weight everywhere else first. But the abdominal fat stays, and eventually you start wondering if your metabolism is somehow broken. But what if the real issue isn't calories alone? What if your body is actively protecting visceral fat because of stress, inflammation, cortisol, poor recovery, and metabolic signaling happening beneath the surface? Now here's where things start getting really interesting. Because researchers studying certain peptides noticed something unusual. Some people weren't just reporting weight loss, they were reporting changes specifically around visceral abdominal fat, waist circumference improving, energy feeling different, metabolism feeling more responsive, almost like the body was changing how it handled fat storage internally. And honestly, that changes the entire conversation around peptide therapy, metabolic health, longevity, and human optimization. But before you get excited, there's something you need to understand first. Because once you start influencing growth hormone pathways, recovery systems, insulin signaling, inflammation, and visceral fat metabolism, you're no longer talking about a simple fat burner discussion anymore. You're talking about deep biological communication systems. And the truth about those systems is far more complex than most people online are telling you. Most people think belly fat is just extra weight. Like you simply ate too much pizza one weekend and your body decided to punish you forever. But peptide science shows something far more interesting is happening beneath the surface. Visceral fat, the fat surrounding your organs, behaves differently from normal body fat. It's metabolically active, heavily connected to inflammation, cortisol, insulin resistance, and long-term metabolic health. In other words, stubborn belly fat isn't just stored energy, it's a biological stress response. And honestly, this changes the entire conversation around fat loss, because your body doesn't randomly store fat around the abdomen for fun. Your nervous system constantly interprets stress, poor recovery, bad sleep, chronic inflammation, emotional overload, and even low-grade metabolic dysfunction as survival signals. And when biology feels unsafe, your body becomes more protective with energy storage, especially around the organs. That's why some people train hard, eat healthy, count calories obsessively, and still feel like their abdominal fat refuses to move. Now here's where it gets even more frustrating. Most fat loss advice completely ignores signaling pathways. It treats the body like a calculator instead of a living adaptive system. Eat less, move more. Sure, calories matter, but your hormones, stress response, sleep quality, dopamine regulation, and recovery systems matter too. This is exactly why biohacking, peptide therapy, and metabolic health discussions exploded over the last few years. People started realizing the body isn't resisting fat loss because it's lazy. It's responding to biology it perceives as unstable. And the scary part, visceral fat doesn't always look dramatic at first. Someone can appear relatively normal while still carrying dangerous levels of internal abdominal fat linked to inflammation and metabolic dysfunction. That's why waist circumference often predicts health risks better than total body weight alone. Your body composition tells a deeper story than the scale ever could. And once you understand that stubborn belly fat may actually be connected to stress signaling and survival biology, the next question becomes unavoidable. What if certain peptides are influencing those pathways directly? Here's the part most people never hear about when discussing peptides and fat loss. Your body doesn't just burn fat. It constantly decides where fat should be stored, protected, or released based on signaling. And one of the pathways getting huge attention in peptide science right now involves something called GHRH, growth hormone releasing hormone. That's where Tesamorelin enters the conversation. Instead of directly injecting growth hormone itself, this peptide stimulates the body to naturally increase GH production through the pituitary. And that subtle difference matters more than most people realize. Now, the second people hear growth hormone, they usually imagine two extremes, either some Hollywood anti-aging fantasy or a giant bodybuilder screaming in a gym mirror. But real metabolic health is much more nuanced than that. Growth hormone and IGF-1 pathways influence recovery, energy partitioning, body composition, inflammation, and how the body handles visceral fat over time. This is why researchers became interested in Tesamorelin in the first place. Not because it magically melts fat, but because it appears to influence how the body regulates deep abdominal fat storage metabolically. And this next part explains why so many people misunderstand peptide therapy completely. Tesamorelin isn't technically designed as a traditional weight loss drug. In fact, some people using it don't experience dramatic scale changes at first. That confuses people because modern fat loss culture is obsessed with body weight instead of body composition. But visceral fat behaves differently. Some studies observed reductions in abdominal visceral fat even when total weight didn't radically change, which means the body may be redistributing energy storage patterns instead of simply shrinking overall mass. This peptide may not simply burn fat, it may change how your body decides where fat is stored. And honestly, that idea changes everything about modern biohacking and human optimization. Because once you move beyond the simplistic calories in, calories out mindset, you start realizing metabolism is deeply connected to signaling, stress adaptation, inflammation, sleep, recovery, and hormonal communication systems. Your body is constantly prioritizing survival first and aesthetics second. And that leads directly into the next uncomfortable truth. The most dangerous fat in your body is often the fat you barely notice until it starts affecting everything else. Most people think belly fat is mainly an aesthetic problem, something frustrating in photos, annoying when buying clothes, or that little stomach you promise yourself you'll lose next month. But visceral fat plays by completely different rules. This isn't just fat sitting under the skin. It wraps around organs, interacts with inflammatory pathways, affects insulin signaling, and changes how your entire metabolism behaves. The most dangerous fat in your body is often the fat you can't fully see. And here's where things get even more serious. Visceral fat is biologically active, which means it constantly communicates with the rest of the body through hormones, inflammatory molecules, and metabolic signals. Think about that for a second. Your abdominal fat isn't just there, it's participating in the conversation. This is why higher visceral fat levels are strongly associated with insulin resistance, cardiovascular risk, chronic inflammation, low energy, poor recovery, and accelerated biological aging. Your waistline can quietly become a reflection of your internal metabolic environment. Now think about how many people normalize the symptoms connected to this. Waking up exhausted, brain fog after meals, constant cravings, low motivation, feeling older than they should, struggling to recover from workouts. Most people blame aging itself, but sometimes the issue isn't age, it's metabolic dysfunction slowly building underneath the surface. And honestly, modern lifestyles almost seem engineered to create the perfect storm. Stress, poor sleep, ultra-processed food, dopamine overload, low movement, and chronic cortisol activation all feeding into the same cycle. But here's the part nobody wants to admit. The body often treats visceral fat like emergency survival storage, which means aggressively starving yourself can sometimes backfire biologically. Your metabolism becomes defensive, recovery worsens, inflammation rises, and your nervous system interprets the situation as even more stress. That's why sustainable fat loss discussions inside longevity, regenerative medicine, and peptide science are increasingly focused on signaling instead of punishment. Because once you understand how dangerous visceral fat really is, you naturally start asking a very different question. Why do some people report feeling metabolically different before they even notice major weight loss? Now here's where the conversation starts getting really interesting. Because some people using peptides connected to visceral fat reduction don't immediately describe dramatic weight loss first. They describe something stranger, more subtle, more metabolic, better energy in the morning, less brain fog, reduced bloating around the waist, feeling lighter internally before seeing huge changes on the scale. And honestly, that completely challenges the way most people think about fat loss and body composition. Most people are emotionally addicted to the scale. If the number drops, they feel successful. If it doesn't, they assume nothing is happening. But the body doesn't always transform in linear, visible ways at first. Some studies around visceral fat reduction observed improvements in abdominal fat distribution without massive overall body weight changes immediately. That's why some people describe certain peptide protocols as weight neutral, but metabolically noticeable. Their waistline changes, their recovery improves, their inflammation feels lower, their body starts behaving differently before it necessarily looks dramatically different. And this next part explains why psychology matters so much here. When visceral fat decreases and metabolic signaling improves, people often notice indirect effects they didn't expect. Better workout recovery, improved sleep quality, more stable energy, reduced cravings, sharper focus, and even improved confidence. Because metabolic health affects far more than aesthetics. Your nervous system, hormones, inflammation levels, dopamine regulation, and performance all influence how you experience daily life. Sometimes people aren't just chasing a smaller waist, they're chasing the feeling of finally having their biology work with them instead of against them. Some people don't just report weight loss, they report feeling metabolically different. And whether that's connected to inflammation reduction, improved insulin sensitivity, better recovery, or changes in visceral fat signaling, is exactly why peptide science is attracting so much attention right now. Because the future of fat loss may not simply be about forcing the body to shrink. It may be about restoring healthier communication systems inside the body first. And naturally, once you start influencing powerful growth hormone and metabolic pathways, one very important question immediately follows. What are the risks nobody talks about enough? But here's where the conversation gets uncomfortable. Because the moment you start influencing growth hormone and metabolic signaling pathways, biology becomes a lot more complex than social media makes it sound. In biohacking culture, people love talking about peptide benefits, fat loss, anti-aging, and human optimization. Very few want to talk about trade-offs, but the body always operates through balance. And the more aggressively you manipulate growth pathways, the more carefully biology needs to be respected. Now let's talk about what researchers and clinicians actually pay attention to. Some people using GH-related peptide therapy report fluid retention, joint discomfort, numbness sensations, increased blood glucose, changes in insulin sensitivity, and metabolic fluctuations. And honestly, that makes sense biologically. Growth hormone pathways influence far more than fat storage alone. They interact with recovery, inflammation, glucose regulation, muscle tissue, metabolism, and energy partitioning. This isn't like taking a basic supplement and hoping for a small effect. These are deeper regulatory systems. But here's the part nobody online really wants to admit. More growth hormone does not automatically mean better health. Your body isn't a video game where you simply increase one stat and magically improve everything else. In fact, excessive or irresponsible manipulation of GH and IGF-1 signaling can create new metabolic problems instead of solving old ones. This is why legitimate regenerative medicine and peptide science focus so heavily on monitoring, context, and individual biology. Because what helps one person metabolically may affect another completely differently. And this next part matters more than people realize. A huge amount of peptide use happening online today is completely off-label, poorly supervised, or sourced from questionable suppliers. That's dangerous. Not because peptides themselves are automatically bad, but because powerful biological signaling systems require precision, especially when you're talking about long-term longevity, metabolic health, and recovery. The more you manipulate growth pathways, the more carefully biology needs to be respected. And once you understand both the promise and the risks, one final question becomes impossible to ignore. Is this actually the future of fat loss itself? Now here's the question quietly reshaping the entire fat loss industry. What if the future of losing belly fat has less to do with eating less and more to do with metabolic signaling? Because for decades, the conversation was brutally simplistic. Calories in, calories out, more cardio, more restriction, more willpower. But modern peptide science is forcing researchers to look deeper into how stress, hormones, inflammation, recovery, and visceral fat signaling actually influence body composition. And honestly, that shift may end up changing everything about how we think about fat loss. Think about how modern life affects metabolism biologically. Chronic stress raises cortisol. Poor sleep disrupts insulin sensitivity. Constant dopamine overstimulation changes eating behavior and recovery. Inflammation alters how the body stores energy. Sedentary lifestyles reduce metabolic flexibility, and over time the body starts protecting visceral fat almost like emergency survival storage. That's why some people feel trapped in cycles where the harder they push, the more resistant their biology becomes. Sometimes the problem isn't lack of effort, it's that the signaling environment itself became dysfunctional. And this next part explains why peptides are attracting so much attention in biohacking, longevity, anti-aging, and regenerative medicine communities right now. Researchers are increasingly exploring whether future peptide protocols could influence body composition by improving communication systems instead of simply forcing weight loss mechanically. That means looking at visceral fat as a biomarker of metabolic stress, inflammation, recovery capacity, and hormonal adaptation, not just aesthetics. In other words, the future of human optimization may involve teaching the body to regulate energy differently instead of constantly fighting against it. The future of fat loss may be less about willpower and more about metabolic signaling. And once you truly understand that, something changes psychologically too. You stop asking, how do I punish my body into losing weight? And start asking, what is my biology trying to communicate? Because maybe stubborn belly fat isn't simply a cosmetic issue at all. Maybe it's one of the clearest metabolic warning signals your body can give you. And once you see it that way, you can never look at fat loss the same again. Now here's the real question. After hearing all of this, how differently are you going to look at stubborn belly fat from now on? Because once you understand that visceral fat may be connected to cortisol, inflammation, insulin resistance, stress signaling, poor recovery, and metabolic dysfunction, you can't reduce the conversation to just calories anymore. Your body is constantly responding to biological signals beneath the surface. And honestly, that's exactly why peptide science is getting so much attention right now. But let's be honest for a second. Are you actually trying to improve your metabolism? Or are you just trying to punish your body into losing weight faster? Because there's a huge difference between the two. The people who truly improve longevity, metabolic health, recovery, anti-aging, and human optimization long-term usually aren't the ones chasing the most aggressive shortcuts. They're the ones learning how inflammation, sleep, stress, hormones, recovery, and metabolic signaling work together as one interconnected system. And once you understand that, fat loss stops becoming a fight against your body and starts becoming a conversation with it. If this video opened your mind even a little, don't stop here. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay close. Because this is exactly what we break down on this channel. Peptides, peptide therapy, metabolic health, recovery, body composition, inflammation, longevity, and what these compounds really do to your body. Through science, not hype. And I genuinely want to ask you something. Do you think stubborn belly fat is mostly about overeating? Or do you think stress, inflammation, cortisol, and metabolic dysfunction are playing a much bigger role than people realize? Drop your opinion in the comments. I'm really curious to read what you think. And if you want to understand how peptides may also be affecting another major biological signaling system connected to motivation, reward, and metabolism, you need to watch the previous video. The peptide women are secretly using for desire. Because it's not enough to understand how peptides may influence visceral fat alone. You also need to understand how modern peptide science is starting to reshape conversations around dopamine, brain signaling, emotional responsiveness, metabolism, and human optimization itself. And once you connect those worlds together, the future of peptide science starts looking very different.